we wanted to build on the momentum that we knew the International Year would create. And we wanted to be certain that the International Year wasn't just a moment in time that we celebrated, but that we actually could achieve lasting impact as a result of it. We knew it would take more than 1 year to significantly move the needle, if you will, of awareness of cooperatives and our impact. And so we wanted to position, even at the outset of that year, for a longer horizon. We have the commitment, and I suspect I'm preaching to the choir on this webinar, but we had the commitment that cooperatives could address some of the more intractable dysfunctions that we've seen in society, particularly since the economic collapse of this past decade. We've seen how tenuous employment is. We've seen the disparity between those with capital and those who are employed for their labor, which has gotten a lot of attention in recent years. We've seen the destruction of the environment through irresponsible production of goods. And those of us in the cooperative movement tend to believe that the cooperative model of business has something useful to offer to address these rising worries. And so from a very pragmatic standpoint, we want to get out our message to countries who need to adopt their policies a little differently. I'm going to talk a bit more about that. But we believe that the cooperative model is more resilient. We have good evidence of that. We believe that it would help to modulate the global economy and domestic economies during a downturn. And so we believe that there are strong public policy reasons for governments to support this. And so for that reason, we drafted the blueprint. So we asked the question in doing that, what would have to happen for the cooperative model to become the fastest growing model of enterprise by the end of this decade? If you're going to set a large goal, and if we're going to say that our impact requires much greater growth of cooperatives, then what would have to happen? What would have to change? And we identified 5 areas that we felt required game-changing strategies to really move to a different scale. And we felt the first 2 of these are ways to differentiate the cooperative model from other models. They're ways that they're elements that we think are essential in how cooperatives work. And that's participation and sustainability. So in the first one, we want to indicate that the cooperative model is the most participatory in the world. It gives people a greater voice. And we think this is a very important message, particularly in this day. The second differentiator is sustainability. We believe that the cooperative model is designed to have an inclination toward sustainability. People are making decisions off more than a monolithic focus on the bottom line. They're looking at the benefits to their community. They're looking at the kind of society they want to live in. They're looking at how the decisions of the cooperative impact others in their community. And it is, we think, by nature more sustainable. So those first 2 pillars I'll talk about a bit more later. Participation and sustainability are differentiators. The third is we think that we need to build a shared global identity of the cooperative model, which doesn't have the awareness it needs. And I'll come back to each of these. And the last 2 of the 5 pillars in the blueprint are essentially elements that every business model needs, every business needs, but there are parts of them, there are things about them that are unique to the cooperative. And one of those is the legal framework that we need that will be conducive to cooperative growth. And the last is capital. Even a model of business that isn't capital defined, capital focused, needs a reliable stream of capital to prosper. There's a lot more you can read about these areas in the blueprint, and you can find that. I know a link was given in the information to this webinar, but you can also find that on our website, ica.coop. So if we were talking a year ago, that's basically all I could tell you about the blueprint, are those conceptual areas, because that's where we started. We knew that those were the areas. We knew there was something about them that had to change, but we hadn't actually begun that work. Our members adopted the blueprint at the end of 2012, the international year, at a special General Assembly. And we started then last year to really begin to implement this. And we've been very active in this area, so there is, fortunately, a lot more I can tell you about the blueprint and what we're doing. One of the areas first is around growth, because the whole concept here, as I mentioned at the outset, is that the cooperative can be the fastest growing form of enterprise. And we were surprised when we drafted that and we sent out the preliminary blueprint to our members that we had some pushback. We had members saying in some cases, well, it really sounds like this is growth for the sake of growth, that this is an unsustainable vision, that we're buying into corporate rhetoric. And so one of the first initiatives we felt we had to address was to think a little more deeply about growth and cooperative growth and sustainable growth and define what we mean by that. And so we developed this thought leadership paper to set forth a cooperative perspective on growth. And this is also available on our website in English, French, and Spanish. The blueprint is available there, by the way, in a number of languages. And this thought leadership paper includes reflective essays from 7 leaders around the world reflecting on growth and what would be sustainable and how we should measure this in the future. And it makes the argument that the old paradigm is changing, the unsustainable paradigm, that it's not changing immediately, but that there are clear signs of this, and that we need to position for this kind of change. And if you've seen Jeremy Rifkin's new book, The Zero Marginal Cost Society, I think he too is making some very strong, a very strong case, and has some very strong evidence of this kind of change. And he cites actually a cooperative renaissance in that book, and he mentions the International Cooperative Alliance as well in the process. So we've started by looking at growth and what we mean by that. And then we've looked at, in addition, the entire question of sustainability, which is very connected, and it is, as I said, one of the 5 pillars in the blueprint. I said that we believe the cooperative model is designed to be more sustainable, that it is inclined towards sustainability in its practices and operations. But before we became especially assertive in that position and take a position in the media that we find we can't defend or we get challenged on and don't have good data, we felt we should start last year, in this first year of implementation of the blueprint, with a foundational piece to prove that case. And so we undertook a scan on cooperative sustainability so that we would have a snapshot, not an exhaustive survey, but a good starting point of where cooperatives are in sustainability, how aggressive, how assertive we can be in our claim that we have a more sustainable model. And it's been extremely helpful. It has helped us identify, in particular, some leaders in sustainability who now are forming, we formed into a sustainability advisory group so that we can look at the tools that we feel we need to improve our record, which is solid, and to create an index or measurements of sustainability so that we can actually track our progress in this area. And I'll say here that in each of the 5 pillars, the goal is not to solve these overnight. These are deep challenges that we've faced for decades, these 5 areas. We're taking a 2020 horizon, and we're being thoughtful in laying the foundations we need to make real change, real improvement, real progress over time toward these goals. So I mentioned that one of the key areas for cooperatives is identity. It's not enough for us to be different or be better and to hope that the world sees that. We also have to manage our image. And when we were at the first cooperative summit in Quebec, there's another one coming up later this year I'll mention, but when we were at the first one in Quebec in 2012, toward the end of the international year, there were a number of studies commissioned that were presented there. And one in particular was by the global research firm called Ipsos Marketing. And they conducted surveys in 5 cities around the world to get the assessment, kind of a high-level sense of how individuals viewed cooperatives. Individuals who were members, individuals who were not members. And the results are really fascinating because they were globally consistent, even across these very different communities. They were in Tokyo, Japan, Buenos Aires, Paris, Manchester, England, and in Quebec, Canada. And yet the results were similar. On the positive side, people tend to believe that cooperatives have a higher purpose than maximizing profits. They know that about them generally, but they have an antiquated view of a cooperative. They tend to think that they're small, always rural-based, that they have few members, that they don't invest in research and development, and so they worry that if they do business with a cooperative, they might make some sacrifice that they wouldn't have to make in other if they were dealing with other businesses. And so we have an opportunity to build on the positive sense that people have about the cooperative model, but to get out some good information about the true benefit. And one way to do that is to expose individuals to cooperatives more fully. And one strategy for doing that is through a shared graphic image. And the image you see on the screen now, I hope, is of the International Year logo. And what this told us is that even though there were many people who didn't really like the image itself, the UN developed it, and we kind of scratched our heads at time over exactly what it was supposed to mean, with the cube and all, and the figures all looked like men, we were told. And so there were things that people didn't like about it, and yet it was widely used around the world. And it convinced us that there is an opportunity to succeed it now. It has to retire. It's the UN's property, and they only let you use it for 18 months or so after the year. But we became convinced that there's the opportunity to create a shared image as a result of this. And so we worked this last year to do that. And we have commissioned an Argentinian and a British firm to conduct a survey, to look at the trade dress that's been used by cooperatives around the world, and to design a global cooperative mark that we just released last November at our conference in Cape Town. And you see it there on the screen. It's the interlocking O's there that symbolize working together. And it's a very simple and original design that's different from ways this has been used in the past. Our assumption going into this was that the image would not use letters, would not be a word, so that it could be truly global. But we were strongly advised as a result of the survey that we should use some form of an image reminiscent of the word cooperative in order to build the association of the image with the cooperative model more quickly, and because it is so recognized already in many countries in one form or another. And so we've done that. We've been delighted with the degree to which this has been accepted. And you can see that it can be used in combination with a number of statements. We're continuing to use the slogan, "Cooperative Enterprises Build a Better World," as one of the key messages. That was the slogan of the International Year. And then there is some accompanying imagery and supportive materials as well. All of these have some form of an interlinking O here in this, and these can be used in conjunction with the image. And at the same time, we have been involved in .coop, and you can see that the image here is also very similar. .coop is the top-level domain on the internet that is available only to cooperatives. You have to be a cooperative in order to use this and register for it. And you can register for it at identity.coop, and you can also register there to use the mark. The other important part of identity is not just this image, but it's really what we stand for. What are the principles that cooperatives believe in? And of course, we have the cooperative principles that are articulated in the statement on cooperative identity. But we wanted to be certain that those can remain relevant, fresh, responsive to emerging questions that come up. And so our members have asked us to develop a series of guidance notes, and this also is within the auspices of the blueprint. We haven't wanted to change the principles frequently because they've been enshrined now in some international documents. They're actually literally incorporated into domestic legislation in a number of countries, and so we're reluctant to change them frequently. But the guidance notes will allow us to have interpretive statements that go deeper into the underlying principles. The first 3 notes were drafted last year on Principles 3, which deals with member economic participation, and 5, which deals with education, training, and information, and number 7, concern for community. And the others are being drafted now. I'm going to mention then briefly the last 2 areas of the blueprint: legal framework and capital. And on the legal framework, what we're trying to acknowledge here is that the guidance notes really address our internal framework, how we want to structure what we think cooperatives ought to look like, how they ought to behave, how they ought to operate. The legal framework explains what we feel we need in the policy and legal environment in order to thrive. And our first initiative here is one called Doing Cooperative Business, and it is inspired by a World Bank report called Doing Business. And the World Bank report is an annual report that's just exhaustive. They look at a wide range of factors in every country around the world that they believe impact the ease of doing business and starting business in those countries. So they look at the regulatory environment, they look at corruption, they look at a number of factors. Our Doing Cooperative Business is a much more focused and complementary document. It would look at the few factors, a handful of factors that we think are essential for a cooperative-friendly policy environment. Can cooperatives work in every sector of the economy, or are they prohibited directly or indirectly from working in banking or insurance or some sectors? Is the government prohibited from contracting with cooperatives for goods or services? So selecting the right factors to assess obviously is important, and that's the stage that we're at today. We do partner with a number of organizations, and we have for a long time, and we're working with them as well to help identify what these factors are. We've been part of the UN consultative process since the inception of the UN. The International Cooperative Alliance was one of the first organizations recognized by them. And then we work with their specialized agencies, the Food and Agricultural Organization and the International Labor Organization. Recently, as part of the environmental scanning work that was done to draft the blueprint, we've become more aware of the importance of some of the multilateral groups like the G20, G8 in the future. And we believe that it's important for this pillar, for this legal framework, that we begin to work more strategically with them. And I'm delighted that with the help and insights of the Business Council in Australia, that we've been able to begin to develop a strategy for how we might impact the thinking around the G20 in the future, starting this year with the G20, which is in Australia, of course. And we're delighted that there is a cooperative member, Andrew Crane, on the Business 20, the B20, which is the advisory group from the business sector for the G20 policy. And so we're learning in that process how to make sure that we continue this long term. And then we also are working behind the scenes to influence leaders whenever we can, particularly if we find that they're sympathetic to the cooperative model and have some understanding, as the current Pope does. And we had a lengthy and we think potentially impactful meeting with him recently. We also recognize that in order to be effective with the blueprint, we need data. We can't just make claims on anecdotes. And so the International Cooperative Alliance, with the support of EURICSI in Italy, Research Institute, develops the World Cooperative Monitor that is a database of now over 2,000 cooperatives around the world that gives us essential information to make the policy case about the impact that cooperatives have. And this year, we've begun to look at how to measure this impact differently. Historically, we've ranked the cooperatives by gross turnover, by total revenue. This year, we introduced a new measure, which was influenced somewhat by the growth report we did, that tries to identify the impact in another measure. So we looked at what is the turnover relative to the GDP of that cooperative's country on a per capita basis. So it gives us a better sense of their revenue relative to the revenue of the country, if you will. It's a little more interesting way of looking at it. And when you do that, you find that the largest cooperative in the world by this GDP per capita measure is actually in India, which is not the sense you get if you look just at the total dollars, where often North America, Europe will tend to dominate some of those, Japan although as well. On this question of revenue and capital and growth, we realize that this is one of the particularly difficult challenges that cooperatives have had, is accessing capital. And we've established a Blue Ribbon Commission on Cooperative Capital to really address this challenge thoughtfully. And they too have taken a year 2020 horizon for their work. And at this point, there's two work streams that they're engaged in. I'm going to mention these, and then I'm going to draw to a conclusion here. The first work stream that they're involved in, they've asked us to really do a snapshot of where capital is being raised now by cooperatives. To do a survey of existing sources, uses, the returns on capitals, the capital structures of cooperatives. How much of this is coming from cooperative financial institutions? How much from commercial institutions? How much from members? And we've commissioned that report now from the Filene Research Institute in the U.S. and we expect that to be ready this October for the high-level findings to be presented at the second International Cooperative Summit, which will be again in Quebec this October. And then the last piece that they're working on, the second piece, is around more of an ideological perspective of capital. What are the attributes of cooperative capital that are favorable, and what are the attributes of capital that are not supportive of a cooperative environment? We want to overlay these two, the thoughtful reflection on what kinds of strings are acceptable on cooperative capital and what would be inimical to our model on the one hand, with the understanding of where capital is coming from, what are the greater potentials for public support, for public funding, public capital streams, is there a need for new financial instruments? Align those two to really identify where we should work to develop the new capital streams. And again, we expect to have preliminary ideas on this at the summit in Quebec, and then we'll have some significant work completed by the time of our next General Assembly and Global Conference, which will be in Antalya, Turkey, November 10th to 13th of 2015. In the meantime, I hope that we will see many of you in Quebec. It promises to be a great event there, and that is coming up here October 6th to 9th. We'll have over 150 speakers there on a variety of topics. It's a real opportunity as well to see some of the state-of-the-art business work that's been done. So with that, I'm going to conclude my remarks and turn back to Melina to see if we have any questions I can try to answer.
Thank you very much, Chuck, for your insights. It's been a very comprehensive overview of the blueprint, but also some very exciting developments that are building the roadmap as you go along and putting the meat on the bones, I guess, of the blueprint. Charles, we now have 15 minutes for Q&A, and I invite our attendees at the webinar to post your questions to Chuck using the type dialog box. We can keep the lobby open for an extra 5 minutes, so we do definitely have 15 minutes. We invited people to post questions to you, Chuck, before the start of the webinar, and I'm just going to kick off with one now, and that is from Ramsey in New Zealand. Ramsey asks, we're going to need tens of thousands of new cooperatives around the world to achieve many of the intended strategic outcomes of the cooperative decade. And my question is, what part of the creation of the cooperative decade objectives do you see a place for discussion on cooperative development best taking place? And can you see a role that the ICA can play in encouraging and assisting initiatives for cooperative development, in particular, Chuck, using the ICA's global network to help develop cross-border linkages between cooperative development agencies and experts?
I think that's excellent. Thank you, Ramsey, for that. There's probably two ways of looking at this, and in some ways, when we talk about cooperative growth, I really commend that thought leadership paper to you that I mentioned at the outset, because there is, of course, the growth of new cooperatives, and there's growth of existing cooperatives, and there's growth that comes from market share shifting from non-cooperatives to cooperatives. So there's a lot of ways to look at this, and we recognize that we have got to develop the measurements that will keep us honest about the success we're making and the progress we're making, and that will actually let us know if we are making progress. So first, our research committee of the International Cooperative Alliance is looking now at the measures that we need to really add some quantitative analysis to this kind of a conversation. If you go back though to the thrust of your question, which is how do you get new cooperatives formed, That is part of what the Capital Group, the Blue Ribbon Commission on Cooperative Capital, is looking at. There is the question of growth capital. How do existing capitals need, what do they need? How can they get capital to move to that next level? It's that classic missing middle that we hear about in development work. You can get established, but you can't always get the growth capital you need to scale the business up some. But they're also looking at new capital and where is it coming from. And we've all seen the anecdotes around crowdfunding and opportunities like that. But we think there is something there, maybe not the full solution to the problem, but if you take a little bit of this and a little bit of that, you bundle it together, you can actually see some pretty significant growth. And so we are exploring carefully, and that's part of the survey work, what is the impact that some of these new models of funding are having that aren't today necessarily just for cooperatives, but what's the potential for cooperatives? The other piece I'd mention, when you talk about making the linkages, there's a very important agenda item on cooperative to cooperative trade, and that is one of the longer term strategies that the Alliance has had for some time. How do you encourage cooperative to cooperative business and activity? And there is some exciting preliminary work in that. The cooperatives in the BRICS countries, for example, have been meeting for a couple of years together to determine what would have to happen for them to develop more probably bilateral trade agreements that would allow them to really develop that intercooperative trade. Our Asian Pacific region is in the process now of developing a platform that would allow cooperatives with items to trade to sort of find a market for those among cooperative buyers. We think all of this needs a lot more work, but there's a number of preliminary initiatives underway now that have strong member support and that I think probably do have some real potential, in part because of the sophistication and successful track record of the cooperatives that are leading in those areas.
Very much, Chuck. I have a question from Brian, and this really has to do with the development of worker cooperatives or employee ownership to share the benefits of economic participation. This is a specific question in relation to Australia, but perhaps you could answer it in the context of other global developments where governments are devolving or outsourcing their service provision to cooperatives as opposed to other forms of private sector provider. And our questioner asks about the opportunities arising from the government here recently announcing that it's going to sell government assets, but also devolve or outsource some of its service areas. In this particular case, an example is being given about a statutory provider of hearing services that's called Australian Hearing. What do you think employees can do to initiate and drive the cooperative model as a preferred provider of government services? And again, I suggest that perhaps we could reflect on what the UK has done that might help that development of the worker cooperative sector.
That's a very timely question, and we are seeing a lot of development, both of the worker cooperatives generally, industrial and service cooperatives, but also the devolving of services that you're talking about. A number of countries have really moved aggressively in this area. I would say Italy is the one that comes first to mind as having created a number of social cooperatives that are generally worker cooperatives that have picked up service sectors that we tend to think of as as providing services that historically have been the responsibility or in the purview or portfolio of states or governments to provide. The UK, as you mentioned, as well, has a fair amount of that. I've been encouraged even to see on a larger basis this serious conversation that's occurring for sort of very difficult challenges in the U.S. where I'm from. The conversation around Fannie Mae, which is a quasi-government institution that was at the core of the housing collapse because they were basically providing a guarantee for banks on the securitized housing portfolios. But the point is that as the government now is looking at what to do with that, they're talking about the possibility of converting it into a cooperative. And now it would be a second level cooperative, and there are advantages and disadvantages to that. But the point is cooperatives are getting increasing respect as a legitimate business model for dealing with very difficult challenges. And so I think the environment is there to get the serious attention of people in government who believe, whether we think it's the right direction or not, people differ on that, but who believe that these government services ought to be privatized in some way, for them to see that the cooperative is a respected business model, a successful business model, and that it has design attributes that make it a more appropriate next step for these kinds of services, as opposed to putting them into a purely profit-making venture. So I think the time for that is very right. A group to talk to in particular as well, I think, is SECOPA, our sector for worker cooperatives, or for what they prefer to call that industrial and service cooperatives. But you can find them through our website as well. It's CICOPA, SECOPA.
Thank you, Charles. We have time for just a couple more questions, and I have one here from Elizabeth at UN Women. Elizabeth asked two questions. The first is, what has been the performance of cooperatives versus normal or other conventional businesses during the crisis? The second part of Elizabeth's question is, what is the membership of women like in the cooperative movement, and what specific challenges might they face in starting or becoming members of cooperatives?
On the first one, the first part of your question, dealing with the performance of cooperatives in during the crisis, there's some good work on this. In particular, some work that the International Labor Organization has looked at. That we and they produced a report at the start of the crisis that looked at the resilience of cooperatives, and they in turn have expanded expounded on that through an engagement with Jonathan Burchell, who's done some background work for them on this, and it lays a strong case for the resilience of cooperatives and for their greater success during the period of the recession. Now, they're not immune from the deep integrated financial challenges that have buffeted so many domestic economies, but they've tended to survive, and they've tended to be seen as safer places for people to turn. And I can give you anecdotal cases as well, but I refer you to those kind of more thoughtful pieces that have been done. In the case of the credit union system in the United States, for example, they've seen the greatest growth in their history, year over year since the crisis began. Their greatest problem now is that they're awash in liquidity. They've got to figure out how to use that cash effectively, which is a challenge when it comes in as fast as it's come in, and that has been because credit unions, which are part of the cooperative movement, are seen as focused on their members. They're seen as not taking undue risks on products they don't understand. It's just not in their charter, it's not their purpose. And they also are benefiting from the backlash against the traditional banking establishment, which is, particularly in the U.S., seen as complicit in the financial challenges. So that's part of the answer on the first question. There have been certainly cooperatives that have failed during the crisis. There have been some real challenges for a number of highly visible cooperatives, and that is what happens when you deal in a global economy, as some of them have done. But the overall story is a positive one, and it is one that we're telling frequently, because we believe that it supports the case that we want to make, which is that domestic economies would be more stable if they had a larger percentage of their economy in the cooperative sector. It would modulate the risk, because cooperatives are by nature risk-averse models. We're not focused on trying to maximize profit, and so we don't see the same huge upside returns in good years always. We don't see the same steep downturn in recessions. Your second question about the role of women in membership is one that we're actually looking at carefully now. We have a members' insights initiative underway now, where we're talking individually with each of our members around the world on a number of questions that are strategic. And in that process, we're probing with them their percentage of women in their members, and how they support and encourage women engagement and youth as well. Cooperatives have a great track record compared to other businesses on this, but it's something that we continue to keep top and center, because it's not yet where it needs to be in terms of full representation.
Thank you very much, Chuck. We have one last question. We've run to almost 5 minutes over time, but I will truncate the question from Terry in New South Wales. He's really asking about community organisation at the grassroots level, Chuck, and specifically how you generate and maintain enthusiasm in the face of the free enterprise commercial economy when trying to organise communities into cooperative communities.
Well, that is a daunting question and a daunting challenge, and I can't speak with any authority to somebody who's a community organizer themselves and who knows this. What I will say is that we believe that we have the opportunity, and this may be a little conceptual and not as pragmatic as you want, so I apologize for that, but we believe that the timing is particularly opportune for the cooperative message. We think that people are tired of their lives being dominated by economic and social models that they feel disconnected from. And I think the recession was emblematic of that. I think it really galvanized a lot of that thinking. I think the Occupy movement reflected that. You could argue that the Arab Spring reflected some of that there's a palpable change in the mood, and that we have a generation coming that is more sustainable. We have an increasing recognition that past practices are unsustainable. This has to come to an end. We see a generation that is sort of the wiki generation. They share more because they believe the more they can share, the better the end product. It's not necessarily about trying to gain a competitive advantage by keeping something secretive and quiet. It's a different mindset, and we believe that all of that makes this a time that's very conducive to the cooperative message. Now, how you translate that into continued energy on the ground in community organizing, I think is a real gift, and I admire people who are effective at doing that. But I do think that the general trends are in the favor of cooperative messages. we're seeing more types of business forming. The corporation, which we keep hearing about, is actually declining. And we see not all cooperatives, but we see employee-owned businesses, we see state-owned enterprises, we see increasing number of partnerships, we see limited liability companies, we see cooperatives. There's a much more robust and diverse set of options out there. And the cooperative message is a very strong one. It has to fight for recognition in all of that noise, but it's a very strong one, and the signals are all very positive for our growth.
Chuck, if I could, Elizabeth has said thank you very much for that very good answer to her question, very comprehensive answer. There is one final question that's just come in, and it really has to do with education. If you could answer this, it just quickly, and we'll sign out. There's a lack of attention to the cooperative model as an alternative business organisation in academic curriculum in business and law degrees in Australian universities. Is this a deficiency in the higher education sector in other countries that you know? And if so, does the ICA have a strategy to promote and encourage attention in academia and in curriculum design?
Yes. That's probably more truncated than you want as a final answer, but yes, actually we do recognize that this is a serious problem, and it's not unique in Australia. You can go to law school or business school around the world and graduate never having heard the word cooperative, and that's just not appropriate. That's why when people go to an attorney and think about how to set up a business idea they have, they're not advised about the options they have for cooperatives because the professionals aren't aware of it. So this is a deficiency. It is a real challenge. Education, and particularly around higher education, was a strong conversation during the drafting of the blueprint. And there were those who felt that education should have been one of the pillars and technology should have been one of the pillars. Finally, the work group on this felt that education needs to run through all 5 pillars. Technology needs to underline all 5 pillars. And it's our challenge now to make sure that those 2 promises that were made in drafting and narrowing to 5 pillars, which is the most we felt we could legitimately deliver on, we had hoped for 3, frankly, and ended up with 5. It's our challenge now to make sure that the promise of those 2 aren't lost because they're underpinning everything, and we will keep that alive. But this is a very real problem in higher education, but also primary education as well.
Unfortunately, we don't have any more time for questions, Chuck. Thank you very much for staying online to answer some more questions. Thank you, everyone, for attending and for your interest and questions to Chuck this evening. This formally concludes our webinar. However, a recording has been made of tonight's presentation, and this will be available for you to disseminate to your friends and colleagues. A copy of the link will be emailed to everyone who has attended. And certainly for more information on the blueprint, you can use the links on the BCCM website or go directly to the ICA's website, which is ica.coop, to find your own downloadable copy of the blueprint and the other supporting documentation. We can also email a copy of the presentation pack that you have seen tonight. I'd like to thank our hosts and sponsors, LBMX, and most I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you, Chuck, for your presentation and your time, and for everyone who has joined in this discussion tonight and today. So thank you very much.
Thanks for the great questions, too. Appreciate it.